Hello and welcome to the Body Align Pro podcast. My name is Isaac Osborne, founder and CEO of Body Align Pro. In this podcast, we interview practitioners who use Body Align Pro and some of the leading experts in the health industry who are committed to taking a scientific approach to improving the form and function of the body and the growth and development of their practice. This podcast is available on YouTube, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. Be sure to check out the show notes for links. To learn more about Body Align Pro and how you can start tracking posture and range of motion with photos and videos, visit bodyalignpro.com. Welcome to episode 12 of the Body Align Pro podcast. In this episode, our guest is Joan Vernikos. She is a former director of NASA's Life Sciences, an author, health coach, consultant, and sought-after motivational speaker on the tangible health and economic benefits to individuals and organizations of resetting your health for life, living healthy, and healthy aging. A pharmacologist from the University of London, her research and publications on the management of stress and how spaceflight and Earth's gravity affect men and women have been recognized with numerous awards. She holds 3 patents, a member of the International Academy of Astronautics. She served on the Space Studies Board of the National Academy of Sciences, is space correspondent for Defense and Foreign Affairs. Her books include award-winning The G Connection, Harness Gravity and Reverse Aging, published in 2004, Stress Fitness for Seniors, published in 2009, and Sitting Kills, Moving Heals, How Simple Everyday Movement Will Prevent Pain, Illness, and Early Death, and Exercise Alone Won't, published in 2011. And this is her short bio. If you take a look at her long bio, I'll just put it in the show notes just so you can see. It's amazing the amount of research and journal entries and everything she has done over her time here on our planet and in what she's shared with us. So in this episode, what we talk about are the effects of sedentary living on our bodies and how that tends to mirror what happens to astronauts in space and what astronauts typically experience recovering from their time in space and what that has done to their bodies. Some of her latest research on yoga as an exercise countermeasure to post rehab after space flight. And she also talks about how it's good for pre-flight as well. Her human-powered centrifuge, and much, much more. It was an absolute pleasure talking with Joan. And this is a very fun podcast and a very fun episode. And I was honored to talk with her and how much work she has done in research of the human body and sedentary living. I think you'll really enjoy this episode. So without further ado, here's Joan. All right. We're recording. Hi, Joan. Welcome to the Body Align Pro podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show here. I'm very, very excited to talk to you today. I've just finished, I just reread your book for the second time. I read it a few years ago, and I was so excited when I reached out to you that you replied that you were willing to be on my podcast. So absolutely excited to have you on here today.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. It's a fascinating perspective you bring to my work.
Wonderful. So I'm going to start off with a quote from your book, and I fell in love with it when I read it. Was our body was designed to live in gravity as a perpetual motion machine. Mm-hmm. I cannot agree with that more. So I would love to have a little background from you. In my research on you, you started in NASA in 1964.
Yes.
And would you please give us some background in how you came to NASA and what you started out doing there and how you got involved with the space program?
If you live long enough, you do a lot of things. When my degree, it was at the University of London in pharmacology, which, if those who don't know, is the action of drugs on the body. the professor I followed around and was fascinated by his work in his teachings was in endocrinology, that's hormones. And he particularly was working on stress and the hormones involved in how we respond to stress. And so that was my early work. And what I did for my PhD thesis, basically, was on how the brain regulates our response to stress. Particular part of the brain, which is the hypothalamus, that's closest to the pituitary, that puts out the hormones that are involved in the stress response. And developed a method of measuring these hormones, which was not available at the time. And it was very interesting because I had access to clinicians who came to me and wanted assays done. So I saw a different perspective of actually the clinical aspect of perhaps what I was doing and the very basics. And then I came to Ohio State University to teach in pharmacology at the medical school. So it was my first job, and which was also extremely interesting for me because it was broadening my perspective. And from there, well, I was about to be deported because I don't know if you want to discuss this, but
you're more than welcome to. You're more than welcome.
What happened was that I had a Greek passport. My parents were Greek. My father was a doctor, and when I came as a research fellow, first at Ohio State University, it was supposed to be just for 2 years. And there was something at the time called the exchange visitors visa, which limited foreigners from staying because the Europeans complained about a brain drain of scientists from Europe to the US. And they came here because they could get research money as opposed to anything else. So they limited the number of years you could stay under this guise. I ended up staying 7 years, which was along the way I did various things. I worked for the government and went to NASA because working for NASA, at least as a fellow at the beginning, was had the possibility that they might waive my requirement to have to leave the country. Anyway, long story short, I was lucky. I got to stay. I got hired by NASA. And my colleagues would say, what on earth are you working for NASA for? I said, what do they do? I said, well, gravity, Well, what about gravity? Gravity is all around us, so what's the problem?
Right.
I didn't know any more than anyone else. And the professor of physiology selected 5 people, 5 scientists, to go with him to start a unit in California. And I was the stress person. There was a person who did exercise, a microbiologist, a bone metabolism person, and human factors. I mean, it was potluck.
Right.
And we just started from scratch. So at the time, they were sending the first astronauts up and the Russian cosmonauts, and just waited to see what would happen. It's as simple as that. And the first time we got to actually measure anything was in the early 60s, where the Gemini mission was 14 days in space, 2 astronauts. It was incredible that they did that then.
Yeah, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, because now, I mean, they're worried about 5 days. And anyway. And I had the opportunity. I figured if you're a human being sitting on top of a rocket, it must be stressful. Therefore, I should be able to measure something. And so I did. The big surprise was that their levels were somewhat high in anticipation of flying. Their levels were certainly high coming back from space, but almost zero, almost nothing during the flight.
Really?
And this was against everything that anybody expected, including myself.
Really? That's
everyone said, well, there must be a mistake. I said, look, they've all been collected the same way. They've been assayed the same time. It's not like they don't respond, because when they come back, they respond again. Before they go, they respond. But during the mission, nothing. I mean, literally below the normal level we have here, you and I, on Earth. And it was a sort of information that got shelved, published it. I knew it. I talked about it periodically, and I was met with skepticism. And until much, much, much later, I realized that these people that went up in space had seen, John Glenn had seen 100 missions over Korea, had seen flights, in wars, the Korean War and then the Vietnam War. And this was gravy. Going up in space was fun. So I started looking at things at the perception, how it was the perception of a situation different, depending on your previous experience.
That makes sense.
And that's my next book anyway, but you don't want to read. It's called Stress Beyond 50. So you're much too young for that.
I'm not that far away.
Well, a bit of rolfing will keep you going.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that was but what happened was that my stress research went sort of in suspended animation for a while, and I looked around to see what I could do, and started looking at gravity and the role of gravity, and developed a ground model which was lying in bed. In fact, the Germans had used it and the Russians had used it. And then slightly head down, about 6 degrees head down, which the astronauts told us felt more like being in space than horizontal.
That's interesting. And this is a few years back, I think right around when your book came out, Sitting Kills, Movement Heals.
Yes.
That was around 2011 when that book came out. Around that time, the whole sitting is the new smoking really started getting popular. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is the research that is commonly cited with that movement, is that the research that you were doing at NASA? Is that the bulk of it? I'm sure there's other research too, but is that the bulk of it from that research?
No. We came from completely different perspectives.
Okay.
I was doing it to mimic the effects of being in space, because when you're standing here on Earth or you're sitting, your gravity is pulling through your body from head to toe.
Yes.
If you lie down, you can minimize the influence of gravity. Gravity doesn't change, it doesn't go away. It's there all the time. But your relationship to gravity changes, so that now gravity is only going across your chest.
Right.
We call the vertical G sub Z and the horizontal G sub X.
Okay.
And the G sub X still has to be really studied and determined, because it assumes there's no effect, but it's not possible. And we don't know.
There's absolutely an effect of gravity in a horizontal position.
Has to be.
Yes, but it's the amount of gravity is less. I don't know if it's less, but it affects the structure of the body differently. Correct. So that what happens is, well, first of all, if you sit in the tub of water, or you go into a swimming pool, you notice certain things. The first thing you notice, if you're a child, you pee. Right.
And that's a response to being in water. And some of the first studies to mimic the effects of being in space were having people sit in water. But you can't sit in water forever. There was a study in Oklahoma where beyond the 48 hours, they got sensory deprivation. They got psychological changes. So they stopped doing that. And no one can use water immersion for longer than 6 hours.
Because of the sensory deprivation?
Correct.
Okay. And so then that's when, is that when you had the idea of doing the sitting and the bed rest? And
that brought, if we wanted to do longer studies, we had to find another model. Mm-hmm. And horizontal studies, lying in bed, was used by many in Germany and in Russia. And then we adopted the head-down model because I brought it to the US. The Russians were using it because, as I said, one of their cosmonauts coming back from space said he could not get a good night's sleep when he got back because he felt as if he was sliding off the foot of the bed. It got better with each night, but he had to get some of the Moscow directories, which are very fat, and put them under the feet of the bed to raise the foot of the bed. So he was now lying head down, and that felt horizontal to him.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought you'd like that.
So can you give me like a little bit more detailed picture of that? I'm not completely picturing it.
Yes.
So the head down model.
Yes.
Is someone lying horizontal?
Instead of lying horizontal.
So
if you go to sleep tonight and you raise your foot of your bed, get a few.
Raise the end up so your head is below your feet.
Correct.
And so this astronaut felt like he was horizontal when you did that.
He felt he was horizontal when he did that.
Interesting. So in his recovery, how did you recover him?
Well, they did it themselves. Basically, they started removing a little bit of the raised foot, whatever was raising their foot, the foot of their bed, like if it was the phone directories until they got, in 5 days or so, it came back to horizontal. I forget those days they were up there mostly 5 days or 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, so you progressively changed the levels of the bed to where
until horizontal was horizontal.
Got it. That's
very your system adjusted. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is absolutely fascinating. And something that my Rolfing mentor, his name's Emmett Hutchins, was playing with before he recently passed, like about a year or two ago, actually a year ago, and he was playing with the inversion.
Yes. Yes.
What he tended to play with was about from horizontal, he'd drop his head maybe 3 to 5 degrees. Mm-hmm. And he said he felt more changes in his body doing it that level than he did a complete like 25, 45 or absolute 9, complete 180 degrees. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to hear what you're talking about with an astronaut coming back from space because of, you called it, I don't know if you called, I think you called most people have gravity deprivation syndrome in your book.
Well, is that
what you call the people coming back from space, is like a gravity deprivation?
Well, in space, they are gravity deprived.
Right.
There's no such thing as zero gravity, or weightlessness. It is microgravity. It's 10 to the minus 5.
Okay.
To be exact.
Yeah.
But they adjust to that. Mm-hmm. They're nauseous to begin with. Mm-hmm. Very often, some of them vomit, some of them don't. But for about 4 or 5 days, their vestibular system is trying to adjust to this absence of cues, really.
Yeah.
I mean, this is fascinating to me. I'm digressing here, but to me, one of the most fascinating aspects of what I've learned from space is that you have the ability to remove cues to remove signals, to remove stimuli.
Mm-hmm.
And that gravity, I've come to the conclusion that gravity is our basic fundamental physiological stimulus.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Again, to jump ahead, and I'll come back to that, but it's related, is that we have been studying astronauts now up to 6 months, a lot of them, and a few going now almost to a year. We have been expecting, like any environment, heat, cold, whatever, altitude, we expect to adapt. We call it adaptation. So we expected, as you lose bone, or you lose muscle, or you lose whatever you lose in space, you would adapt. So you would reach a level which would then plateau off. And we have not reached that yet, and I don't think we will.
Why don't you think we will?
Because it is such a fundamental aspect of our being human, being upright, living on Earth, evolving on Earth. We are removing our basic signal.
So this brings up the question, like, Mars is a very popular destination right now. Mars has, I don't know, you probably know what the gravity difference on Mars compared to the Earth is.
A third.
So we make it to Mars. Just say we make it to Mars.
Yeah.
And we're there on Mars for the next 20 years. It stands to reason, if those human beings survive, that they're going to be completely different human beings than here on Earth because of the difference in gravity. Is that just fantasy, or is there merit to that?
Yes and no. Let's go back to, let's say we are continuously living in space, not Mars.
Okay.
Microgravity, which has some gravity, but I think it's below threshold. All right. Now, if you go to the moon, if you look at the images you've seen of people on the moon, like who landed on the moon, they were still able to be upright.
Yes.
As opposed to someone in space that, can tumble and float and look at if they float or whatever.
There is no directional sense, right?
But on the moon there is, and they would bounce up and down, and they would sort of float, but there was some directional stimulus, and that's 1/6 g.
Okay.
Mars is better, so it gives you some more. My guess is that it's close to or above threshold. So you, as a human being, would need threshold level of gravity to be normal.
Got it.
If you have threshold level of gravity, I think you can amplify it. How can you amplify it? Well, if you jump, you'd amplify it. If you, they would carry the backpacks with the breathing and recycling life support apparatus, which is, I don't know how many kilograms weight. You're amplifying your load.
Right.
So if you have threshold, you're able to amplify. If you don't have threshold, it looks as if, and I'm the only one saying this sort of stuff, okay, I haven't heard anyone else say that, but, I can say things like that. You become like a whale.
Okay.
Think of a whale. A whale is a mammal, all right? And it lives in water. So it is gravity-free. Does it have legs? Sure. It has vestiges, like, vestiges of legs that are mostly cartilage. So if you X-ray a whale, which is an interesting visual.
Sure.
If you X-ray a whale, you will see the skeleton, and where normally you and I have legs coming out of the hip joint, they have these vestiges, which they don't use.
Mm-hmm.
But they're there.
Yeah, there's very little use from the whale in their vestiges, in the sense that they're probably just used really for maybe steering, or I don't know. I'm not a biologist.
I'm sure they have found a way of using whatever is there, or it might have disappeared completely.
Right.
And the fact that there is something there suggests that,
Mm-hmm.
But nature has these animals or species that show variations
Mm-hmm.
in their structure.
So you're thinking that if we spent, say, 5 years in space, do you think that we'd reach a point where we couldn't come back to Earth? Because the gravity, the body is essentially adapting and changing so much.
I think it's possible. I think we could come back and restore if we have maintained ourselves at a certain level. If we did nothing, we would probably. There's one astronaut that lost 30% of bone in 6 months. Okay, no, it's only one. All right, it's not all of them.
Right.
There's one astronaut that lost nothing. So we have genetic predisposition to losing bone or whatever. Mm-hmm. But most astronauts now who have stayed 6 months, we have quite a number now who have stayed 6 months in space. Mm-hmm. They have lost an average of 5% a month. Now you stay there 6 months. Mm-hmm. It's a sizable proportion of your bone.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't want to go around losing, that much. And you can recover, and they do recover, but the recovery is different in that the architecture is different. And that is interesting because...
What do you mean by the architecture is different?
All right, you have a bone, like, a piece of... You've seen a bone.
Yeah.
And the density, the bone cells are in the periphery, mostly, but they also, it's porous and interlaced and of the structure of the bone.
Yes.
You've seen the
spongy bone and the way that the bone is formed.
As you, as a male, grow older, your bone architecture, your bone density won't change. You'll have strong bones, but all your density will mostly be towards the periphery.
I see. Okay.
Like a bark. And a bigger hole in the middle.
Right.
The bone is strong, unless you really, bang it with a hammer or something. but it's not, and you have less fractures in males as you get older. Women lose bone, lose the whole porous nature. It becomes much more porous, the bone, as they get older. And therefore the strength and the density are reduced. And therefore there's the possibility of fracture. So what happens to astronauts when they return is their bone recovers. Their bone density recovers. But the architecture is like that of an old man. So the architecture does not recover. And that is because we haven't figured out yet that you need to push and pull and push and pull the way we normally do in our life to maintain the bone structure, pores developed throughout, as opposed to just in the periphery.
So in a short sense, the expansion and compression of the body goes through movement in gravity.
Yeah. Normally.
And that is
if you move, but it's extremely difficult to do that in a microgravity environment. It is not impossible, and someone has to address that. because I think it can be addressed. But you have to start from the beginning. You know, once you trigger, a decline of some sort, it's hard to reverse it. If you start from the beginning, if you start before you go up even, and you maintain a concept of push-pull on the bone that mimics what you do here on Earth. The variety, and this is the beauty of what we do. It's the variety of movements.
Absolutely.
And we go and we exercise in the gym. There's one machine that does this and another machine that does that, and the body says hello, and then what about the rest of me? It's not bad, but it's not normal.
Yes, and this is actually something that I want to kind of dive a little deeper on, because you mentioned it in your book about Clay Anderson, who spent 147 days in space, and you say in your book that he learned that exercising the big muscle groups left the smaller ones along his spine weaker from lack of use. And so I would kind of term this to some degree the extrinsic muscles and the intrinsic muscles of the body, or the stabilizers and the prime movers.
Exactly.
And I think you go further on in your book talking about trampolines and jumping rope, and how that triggers the intrinsic musculature. And is this kind of what you were leading to a second ago what you were talking about in the gym?
Yes.
There's way too much emphasis, in my opinion, on the extrinsic musculature in typical exercise philosophy.
Yes.
And
it depends what you exercise for.
Yes. Most people try to exercise, I think, for the fact of looking really buff.
Mr. Universe.
Mr. Universe.
Well, you've got to make up your mind what you want to be when you grow up.
Right.
Which muscles?
So what I find fascinating is, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, and if I miss something in your book, most of the activity that you're recommending seems to be more on a higher velocity, for like jumping rope, trampoline work, and that sort of thing, for triggering the intrinsic musculature of the body, or the stabilizers, which I don't disagree with. However, I've found through my practice and working with people who have very poor posture, who have very poor movement patterns, that you can also access that intrinsic intrinsic musculature through slow movement. And slow movement and putting the body in certain positions that challenge the body from either horizontal lying position to on their hands and knees, to kneeling, to squatting, to standing, all these different positions, and asking for certain positions of the body and also certain movements, slow movements and stabilizations. And I find that that's also an important piece to recovery for people that are in pain and or have poor movement patterns. But I was wondering if there's any correlation to maybe recovering astronauts as well that may have that same aspect, or if you guys maybe explored that, or if I missed it somewhere in your book.
No, you haven't. I've got another book, you may or may not have seen it, called Designed to Move.
I haven't seen that one. I've seen it. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, it goes more into the moving skeleton, if you will, especially the vestibular system.
Okay.
And stabilizing postural component that probably plays a far bigger role than we have given it credit for.
Sure.
I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. We should step back and reconsider what we're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, people are exercising more.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what they're doing is drilling, perhaps, or bombarding selectively.
Yeah, it's. I think the typical exercise is the kill it mentality. Go, 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 go.
Yeah.
And not much emphasis based on like you were saying. And
that's what I'm saying. And when I talked even in the Sitting Kills book, when I talked about jumping rope and trampoline and so on, I tried to introduce the concept of playing.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, I was going to ask you about that.
If you can tell somebody they're playing and they're not exercising, they're more likely to do it, perhaps, and enjoy it.
Yes.
So these are things, in other words, children do, people do, why not you, kind of thing. But is there a perfect answer? Not unless you're a 2-year-old.
Right.
And then you have it without anybody telling you what you're supposed to do.
Absolutely. I love your idea about adult playgrounds. It'd be so, it'd be so much fun to have a giant slide, or, one of the things I actually do is I do obstacle races, like a Spartan race and Tough Mudder. You get these giant obstacles and monkey bars, and they're a lot of fun because it's like you're a kid. It's like you're playing. It really brings up that play. I think that's fantastic that you mentioned that and you're recommending that. How long does it typically take for an astronaut to recover fully from their stint in space?
When we were sending them up on the shuttle, which was up to from 4 days to a week, 2 weeks, when they started getting longer on the shuttle, it took them an equal number of days to recover.
Okay.
Day for day. The longer they stay, the longer it takes to recover. And those that have stayed the longest, they'll tell you they recover, but it's hard to, what is the recovering to? What's your control? Where did you start?
Right.
And you're losing, say, bone, or you're losing muscle right away. You start losing. You don't start losing 30 days later. You're losing balance right away. I had, I know, probably in the book somewhere, an astronaut who later became a commander. He was a pilot at the time. And when he came back, we were doing balance posturography, balance tests, trying to see, but he'd only been in space 9 days. And I'm watching him, and I happened to be at the landing, which was thrilling, talking, and people were chatting around, and nobody was paying too much attention, and they shouldn't be doing it, but that's okay. And at some point, I see him leaning forward. And I'm thinking to myself, well, surely, he straighten up, right? And he keeps going and keeps going. Oh my God, he's going to fall flat on his face. And I rushed to grab him. There's no way I could have supported him. Unfortunately, other people saw him. We all grabbed him, and he shook his head and he said, "What happened?" I said, "What do you mean, what happened?" He said, "I had never had the sensation that I was falling."
Whoa.
This is in 9 days. All his brain maps that told him where he was relative to his environment were gone.
Whoa. That's crazy.
And that's a guy who is fit and exercised in flight and did everything that he was supposed to do. and he lost it. So what happened? What happened was his inner ear went silent. There was no stimulation.
Wow.
There was nothing there. All his cues were visual. As long as his eyes were open, he could more or less, but astronauts would come back, even rats we sent in space, and they would come back and they would walk on the top of their foot and then put it down. Top of the foot and then put it down. And of course they would trip. The humans would, the rats didn't.
Right.
But they lost all their sense of lifting a foot and putting it down. The normal gait and stride.
Yeah, the feedback loop of the ground.
Feedback loop, and there is no ground feedback.
Huh. Well, the body has that rule, like use it or lose it, right?
So what do? You tickle their soles of their feet with some stimulus or something? I laughed in Russia. Outside every hotel room, there was one of those things that brush your shoes. Polish your shoes. You stick your shoe in, these brushes go around and around. And I told them they should have one of those up in space and stick their foot in and get. I don't think they thought that was sufficiently sophisticated, but something.
Yeah.
We forget how important contact stimulation of every part of our body is.
Yeah. So I'm curious, did his vestibular system fully recover from that?
He did, and he went on to be a commander. But I mean, he never forgot that. He talks about it and he goes around talking because. And what we did, of course, we put a harness on the following people when we did the test.
Yeah.
So if you're going to fall, fellow, there's a harness to hold you up. But if they all have problems, and soon.
Right. So with all this research that you did, you really tied this in with the sedentary lifestyle of people and the similarities of the sedentary lifestyle. I mean, you have a whole table in your book. That talks about. Let me see if I have my notes. I can find in my notes here. The sedentary adults versus astronauts in a microgravity environment. What happens to the body? And you have 21 examples of how the similarities of the sedentary lifestyle of it's not as fast as like you were mentioning earlier, the bone density loss compared to an astronaut, but they're all there. And you're talking about gravity in our everyday life. And can you just kind of give like a brief overview of your perspective on that so that people can maybe utilize it in their everyday life? But also from the aspect of what is too much sedentary, like what would you term as too sedentary?
It's first of all, what I found out is that it's not how many hours you sit, it is how many uninterrupted hours you sit.
Mm-hmm.
And what doesn't come through, they keep saying, like, I sit for 6 hours, I sit for 10 hours a day, which unfortunately a lot of people do as part of the day, sitting in front of a computer, even at home. It's not unusual.
Mm-hmm.
What is not necessary is to sit 6 hours uninterrupted.
Got it.
And if you remember to stand up or to move preferably in the vertical, against this force that's pulling you down. After all, we became bipeds by doing that, reaching up, and you can actually remain reasonably normal.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Now, a fellow called David Dunstan in Australia has done some work with diabetics and pre-diabetics. And he found that taking healthy, normal young people and having them sit in a chair, within an hour, their triglycerides increased. And they looked like they're pre-diabetic. Just sitting.
What?
Healthy.
Really?
Yeah. So it's not hard to start showing the consequences of sedentary living. But the other side is that we used to, or we are as we grow up, certainly the children, do what I call non-exercise activities, preferably with purposeful activities. So you use the toilet, which is my simplest example. You squat. Preferably, you go out in the garden and do whatever. You squat and you use your legs.
Yeah.
And it's a vertical, up and down motion that is part of your daily living. I tease my audiences and say, this is why we women live longer. Because we have to use the toilet more often, to sit on the toilet more often than a man does.
So you're getting
Prove me wrong.
You're getting more squats throughout the day.
Prove me wrong.
No, I'm not going to argue with you on that one. You know what? It's funny because I tell my clients who have jobs that they sit at a desk all day, and I'm curious what you think about this. I usually tell them that roughly, if you want to take a gauge from your body, it's if you're sitting, and as soon as you feel the first signs of slouching, that's when you stand.
Yeah.
You have a stand-up desk, then the desk hopefully goes up and down. And then as soon as you feel yourself slouching again, standing, that's when you sit.
Yeah.
You just keep changing the stimulus on it, so that might be a half an hour, that might be 45 minutes. That might
right, exactly. It's somewhere in there, between the half hour and the 45 minute, that the body says, wake up. And it doesn't matter what you do, whether I had someone in my audience say, oh, I couldn't do that, I'd get fired. I said, what do you do? He says, I work in a computer company and my boss would fire me if I stood up. I said, you go to the bathroom, don't you? He said, oh, yes. I said, you have a printer, you put it a little further down. You drink water? Well, yes. I said, you have a water fountain? Well, no, we don't have water fountains anymore. Okay. But I have a bottle of water. Where is it? On my table. I said, okay, you go and put it as far as you can away from the table so that you need to stand up to get your water.
Yeah.
Design your living.
Exactly. Design
your living to encourage you to move vertical, preferably. Even when you're sitting, just to remind you, if you're sitting in an armchair, which are terrible things anyway, slide your elbows back.
Absolutely.
Just slide them back and slide them forward, slide them back. He says, well, if I put a bicycle ergometer under my desk, I said, no, that's not the idea. And no device will do it for you.
Yeah, no device will do it for you. And I don't think that, there's some trends that have like a treadmill, where like a treadmill desk, where you're walking on a treadmill. I don't know. That just sounds a little bit more.
I can't concentrate if my legs are moving at the same time. It's just not. But what I do like is what they're designing for kids in elementary schools is higher desks, higher tables, and at the bottom a swinging bar. So what they do naturally, without anyone telling them, is they put one foot up on the swinging bar They can't put both feet up, so then they put their foot down and change the other foot. And it's marvelous. And the cognitive functions have improved, and they have wonderful results with that sort of thing. So
that's fantastic.
It's creative. It takes what we do naturally and adapts it without fancy, complicated devices.
So I'm curious about, speaking of devices and tracking, when you were doing a lot of the research with the astronauts, and you talk about posture, because that's one of my main things that I talk about. I was just in my app. It tracks people's posture. You take a photo, and then you take an after photo, and you can track progression through photos and videos and gait analysis. I was curious if you guys did any of that type of documentation with the astronauts at all in your research.
If we have, I'm not aware of it. And I think it's terribly important. There was a French scientist who had done some interesting stuff, but very little on posture. They figure it's gone, it's going, and when I get back, I'll sort it out. Well, it's not that easy. Yeah. Because all the little muscles all along your spine are totally unstimulated. Yep. Totally unstimulated.
And it's what
and you collapse.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I find is that a lot of people don't have really much access to those muscles in the first place, especially people that exercise and exert themselves really hard with the extrinsic musculature. They don't have much access to those intrinsic musculature.
That's interesting. Now you're telling me, I can see it, but I never thought of it before, because that's a very significant loss. I mean, they all come back with horrible back pain. Yeah. Horrible back pain. Yeah. And they did that from the very first studies. Those astronauts came back with back pain. They couldn't figure out why they had back pain. It was just a couple of days.
Huh. That it's I don't think there's much known about the intrinsic musculature. I don't think it's been really researched that deep.
No, it's hard to get to, so you ignore it. But they, you grow longer in space as you grow longer as a youngster in bed. And then you stand up, and if you're growing fast, you collapse. And there's nothing to hold you supported. And you have pain. Yeah.
There's many possibles about what that pain is coming from. It could be just the ligamentation stretch, the lack of loading in the discs. There's a lot of speculation there, I would imagine.
It's a very important area.
Absolutely. So I was looking at some of your patents that you have, and I was really, really fascinated with the human-powered centrifuge. And
the first person who exclaimed it, and I was so proud of that, because I'm not an engineer. I don't have a clue how to design anything. And what I kept telling them, you have to provide gravity somehow on a long duration mission. I don't care how you're going to do it, you have to provide it. Well, we can have, Star Trek type of, the spacecraft rotating. Okay, fine, that's good. You have the money to do it? No. Okay. And we don't have the power to rotate anything. Right. So we can have a centrifuge on board, but we have to draw power away from everything else and I remembered as a child, we would go to Greece in the summer on an island, and the water was collected through the winter in a cistern, and we would have a pumping device machine to pump the water up into a tank. Sure. Yeah. And then we had water to do whatever we wanted to do, to shower, to eat, to drink. And And so my sister and I used to fight over who would do the pumping. And I thought, well, why can't you pump that plate of metal or whatever you're doing with an astronaut on it in space?
Sure.
So I got 3 students from San Francisco State University during the summer, and I said, okay, guys, this is what we're going to do. We're going to devise a human-powered centrifuge. And what I want is a plate, metal plate, that would be flush with the ground. Beneath it, I'll have a motor in the center, which either the astronaut on the plate can move by moving something, rowing or bicycling or whatever, or a stationary bike on the side, which they have anyway, that would be connected by a rod underneath the floor. And as the guy bicycled his normal aerobic exercise, it would be running around it would be turning the plate, where another guy or 2 guys were lying with their head center, feet out. They would stimulate and mimic the influence of gravity, like standing or a little more than standing, on and off all day. They could get on and off that thing all day, just like we get on and off. You see, my problem is when people exercise once a day.
Right.
And then what you do, you sit the rest of the time to recover from the exercise.
Exactly. So I assumed when I looked at because I looked it up, I Googled it, and I'll put a link in the show notes here for people that want to check it out.
Yeah.
And I saw that the head was at the center, and I'm assuming that was to have less dizziness.
Yes.
Is that correct? Because if you place the head on the other end, it's going to be it's like being on the.
Oh yeah, you get blood up to your head.
Right.
And you don't want that. I mean, not too much. You want some, but not too much.
Right, but then
you want the ability to do on and off. In other words, start and start. If you do it yourself, you have more control of rotating faster or slower, or on and off and on and off. And you're mimicking what you do normally, I think, and you're playing again.
Yeah.
Or you can have someone pedaling on the side and making you scream with whatever.
So you did build one. You did.
Oh yes, the students built one.
Okay.
It was very interesting because I couldn't get funded by NASA. And I went to the director of the research center, and I said, look, I said, I'm playing here. But I think we can teach students about gravity by having them come and try and build this thing. And he was an engineer, and he thought that would be fun. And he gave me $50,000. And most of the money went to write the report. And what the report did was show them that if this plate was swiveling around, it wasn't like a gyroscope. It would throw the shuttle off balance.
Right.
And that's what they were concerned about.
Sure.
And what the other thing was interesting is I went to another center that specialized in power. And I said to them, okay, these guys generate more power than they need to rotate this thing. Now, how can I store that extra power? They said, it's not worth it. I said, what do you mean it's not worth it? The lights go off on Mir or on the space station. You better have the ability to turn on the light bulb.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's as simple as something like that. Now I guess they could do more things. But I was totally dismissed as irrelevant. And it almost got on the shuttle, the design, because it really was simple. It was too simple. It was too simple for the big aerospace companies. To be
maybe Elon Musk will take one.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to meet that man. Because it's the practical things that, anyway, it almost made it, but it didn't because the shuttle was grounded.
Right. It's interesting. It's sometimes in life, it's those little things that actually make the biggest difference.
Yes.
And so is there any human powered centrifuges out there today? Like does anybody have one?
No, but there will be one. I get all kinds of interesting people contacting me. Out of clear blue. I mean, I've met more interesting people than you know. It's wonderful. And this gentleman has 75 patents to his name. He's in his 80s. Brilliant, just an inventor. Mm-hmm. And he's a guy who invented the jumping, the little, what do you call it, trampoline that has a rim all around, and for individual trampoline.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's used. And he said, that this centrifuge, I said, look, if it's not make $1 million, nobody's interested. He said, no, I think we can make one for everybody. He said, you mind if I put in for a patent? I said, I don't mind, It doesn't make any difference to me. I'm not going to. No, he said, I think we should. He's built one. An individual centrifuge. I'll put you down. If you, he used to live half the year in Florida and half in Wisconsin. He lives in Wisconsin, and he's got a workshop. And in fact, I have a video of his centrifuge. I might send you. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, please do.
It's a fun thing. It
sounds fascinating to me.
I think it could be used for all kinds of things. I think it could be used to get blood up to your brain. Mm-hmm. You're lying down, and it could be something that you jump on and off and play with. You can sit on it or lie. You don't have to be energetic to be able to work it.
Right. I mean,
it's a manual control.
For all we know, it could be used in spinal rehab.
Well, that and the concussion guys.
Sure. Absolutely.
And that's big business, big thing. But as far as I'm concerned, if it can be, you see, the last chapter in that book nobody reads, called Gravity Therapy, and that's a whimsy of mine. And as I say, nobody reads it, but I wanted to put it somewhere. And because one day we will start using the things we do spontaneously and don't realize it.
Yes.
Using gravity for better health. Mm-hmm. And I've put some examples in there of ways we can use gravity as therapeutics in therapy. Mm-hmm. But we're not doing enough. I mean, take children now, they're born with cerebral palsy. And they have these wonderful volunteers that make them, they're lying down with the child and they're moving their legs, and it's wonderful, but it's in the wrong direction.
Yes.
It should be this way. Mm-hmm. And you know how quickly that brain is going to pick up and figure out that there is a connection between, the brain and the rest of the body. Yeah. Whereas they leave them lying down and they'll never get well.
No, absolutely. So this kind of brings us to what you mentioned to some degree before we started recording today's episode was you said early movement. Mm-hmm. You recently joined, I forget.
Yes, it's the International Association for Early Mobility. And I shall send you the website. There is a meeting in September. Okay. In fact, it's the first international meeting. The one I went to, it's in Atlanta.
Okay.
And I'll tell you when it is. We are supposed to talk, but unfortunately I'm going to be gone. It's 5th and 6th of September.
Oh, okay.
4th, 5th, and 6th. But I'll send you the name of the woman who organizes it, called Heather something or other. And you should be able to get information. You should look at them because I think they have more possibilities than they realize.
Sure.
Most of them work with trying to get people while they're obese and can't get out of bed and they need all kinds of contraptions to support them, or anyway, whatever they can do for.
So it's more based off of early mobility from someone that is in bed rest, like in a hospital. So are they talking like early mobility from an infant toddler development stage?
No, they're looking at the hospital setting, because these the people who come to this are physiotherapists and nurses. Okay. But with a title like that, I think it's open to all kinds of variations of the theme, and must be.
Yeah, absolutely. Just out of curiosity, have you done any research on like infant development of movement, crawling development, walking development? It's something that I'm researching right now.
Really? How fascinating. No, I have not. When I was at Ames Research Center in California, the NASA physician, liked playing with devices and things. And one of the things that they developed was for children who could not move. They developed a hockey puck contraption that supported the child. The child could lie on its stomach on this hockey puck that was connected with a pipe to whatever, air. And with the slightest movement and no friction, of course, the puck would move. So the child learned that if they did something very simple, like move their arm on one side, they turned on the other. So it was wonderful to watch these children. So there's all kinds, of things you can do.
It sounds a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
A lot of fun.
How are you doing on time?
I'm fine.
I have another question about some of the research that you did. It was back in 2010 with, is it Deepak? I don't know the last name. And Sarkar D. It was yoga therapy as complementary approach to stress reduction and exercise, countermeasure effectiveness before, during spaceflight, and in post-flight rehab. It was in Washington, D.C. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about that research and what were some of the findings and what you guys did?
Well, I enjoy yoga. A lot of friends who enjoy yoga, more people than I realized who came to the session were yoga followers. And I was fascinated. I have been fascinated by the breathing variety that you have, that yoga introduces. I mean, we all do it, we're just not aware of it. Yeah. And yoga teaches us how to become more aware of what we do, how we do it, and the breathing.
Yeah.
And how you can regulate your circulation by varying your breathing. Your parasympathetic nervous system calm down, your stress response, and all these factors, and how all of these approaches could help train astronauts, or train, certainly, it just came to me, the passengers who are buying tickets to go even for 4 days up in space.
Yeah, absolutely.
A self-taught device instead of taking pills. I mean, if I've paid $100,000 to go for 4 days in space, the last thing I want is to be doped up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people pay to go to the Himalayas, and they have to get in shape to do that. So why not get in shape to go to space and have
and something as simple as breathing exercises, for heaven's sake, anyone can do them. And it was fascinating reaction and response. I think astronauts do it spontaneously on their own. There is no formalized. I mean, we proposed to offer them some tuition, and my colleagues who are, one is in fact, he was a heart surgeon and got a heart attack and couldn't practice his surgery. And he started studying Ayurvedic medicine and became an expert. So it's for everybody. And it's a tool. We all need two things. For health, you need to become aware of yourself.
Absolutely.
And so many of us just slump somewhere and expect the body to perform when we want it. And the other is there are lots of things we can do to correct, to improve, to maintain, to have fun.
Absolutely. Well,
you've run out of things?
No. Well, I think we probably go for, like, with our fascinations, we could probably go for a few hours here. I don't want to take up your whole day.
No, I think you mentioned earlier the gravity deprivation syndrome. And the gravity deprivation syndrome is kind of interesting because it came out of what we see happening to, you see, when in the old days, in the 19th century, if you were sick, you were put to bed. Unless you were married to some guy out in the farm. And then the farmer went out and plowed and did whatever, and you cleaned the house and made babies, and thousands of them, and died. And he had many wives. I mean, it was a different kind of life. But the people who lived in urban society were sedentary. But apart from that, if you got sick, oh my dear, you have to rest. So you were put to bed. So when we started doing better studies, we thought, this is not good for you. I mean, look at all the terrible things that happen when you lie in bed. Of course they didn't survive whatever illness they attributed their death to.
Right.
It was lying in bed.
Yeah.
And of course, at first, the medical profession didn't accept that. Fortunately, insurance companies saw benefit in getting people out of bed and out of hospital. And that's when it started. Yeah. Oh, I tried. Believe me.
Those are the last people that I thought that would have recognized it, but they must.
Well, it depends how you put the phrase the issue. Somebody took it and thought, aha, look what I can do. I can get them out of the hospital. And they're still paying the same amount of money.
Yeah.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
It's great. It's
whatever works.
Yes.
Whatever works. So this was so we have the bed rest model that helps you recover. Well, gee whiz. Get out of bed and you'll recover. Stay in bed and you'll die.
Absolutely.
So that's a very interesting, and sitting is in between.
Yeah. What comes to mind when you're talking about that is that, I have two kids.
Yeah.
And every time they would get a cold when they were infants, or especially toddlers, they never stopped moving unless they were like almost deathly ill,
Yeah.
But their nose would be running, they'd be coughing, but they, still wanting to run around the house or pick up such and such objects. And, they wanted to keep going. And I think that really speaks to that aspect of that. I mean, there's so many fundamentals of the human body. For instance, the lymphatic system is built off of gravity and movement.
You have to move.
Absolutely.
Well, when I was a child, it's a long time ago, my father was a doctor, even older than that, and you go to bed when you were sick, and they give you an enema. Well, very quickly, my sister and I learned that it was much better to go to school than to stay in bed and pretend to be sick. Whatever works.
Yeah, I would opt for school than being in bed with an enema for sure. Absolutely. Uh, let's see. I think that we covered most of my questions, and unless there's anything else that you want to talk to, I think that we're gonna end the episode here.
Tell me a little bit about your rolfing.
Oh, rolfing, or also it's most commonly known as rolfing. It was just the nickname of the founder of Dr. Ida Rolf. Its true name, so to speak, is structural integration. And what we do is we work with. She really liked Dr. Rolf. I'm going to kind of back up. She really liked looking at the body from a physics standpoint and gravity, and how gravity affects the joints and the structure of the body and how the joints relate to each other. And the medium for which we work with is connective tissue, and how connective tissue can become restricted and caught up. So we work with the connective tissue through a series. Classic Rolfing is a 10-session series where you work with the first 7 sessions is working to create a lot of length through the body. And then sessions 8, 9, and 10 is what we call the integrating hours, to where you work with all that length that you came about, and you kind of put it all together, so to speak. It's kind of like, I used to kind of like to say that it's like putting a puzzle together, where you start having these big groups. And once you get those big groups, then you start coordinating those big groups together. And there's a lot of research right now going on about fascia, or connective tissue, and its role in the body, and its role as a sensory system. That's something that has really come out a lot recently. Is that it's the sensory, one of the main sensory systems of the body, because of the sensory nerves, how many sensory nerves that are in the body. And so when you have restrictions in fascia, you have restrictions in movement, so your sensory system becomes much more dull, so to speak. And so you start losing movement. And this is where I also started looking at corrective exercises and functional movement to be able to apply to individuals, because the Rolfing's, the structural integration, is great for releasing restrictions and reducing patterned movement of muscle memory and muscle coordination patterns, but it doesn't take care of all of it, because the nervous system has to be able to be involved from the standpoint of activating. True change comes from the inside of an individual, and that has to be activated in the body. So how I practice is a little bit different than most structural integration. Most structural integration just typically deals with some movement stuff, and work with connective tissue mainly to free up the connective tissue, and then they send people on their way. Whereas I work with freeing up the connective tissue, reading how the body is responding to that, taking photographs, keeping track of that through photos and videos and documentation through that, and then applying corrective exercises to change the muscle memory patterns in the body, so that someone can really shift the neurological dysfunctions that they have in their body, so that they can get out of pain, they can change their posture, or increase their athletic performance.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And recently, in the last few years, I've been really diving deep into, like I was saying, I've been doing a lot of research on infant development, infant movement, and how the human body, the question I like to ask myself over and over again is, what is natural movement? Where do we belong in movement? And I'm looking a lot at the 5 most natural movements that we would be doing in our environment, especially that what kids typically end up doing is the rolling first, and the crawling, and then the walking, and then climbing and swimming. And those movements, how those joint relationships work throughout the body through movement, and kind of somewhat kind of developing my own philosophy based off the Rolf work and based off the other corrective exercise work and somatic work and other stuff that I've studied, and looking at where people are from that standpoint. When someone comes into my office and their back is hurting or their neck is hurting, where is their body positioned in space, and where is that natural movement lost? And how fast can I restore that natural movement from either manipulating connective tissue and or adding exercises that trigger that natural movement in their body that restores balance back to their system.
Well, it's an intelligent approach to fixing your problems, not your problems, one's problems, as opposed to all the other stages of treatments around, whether it's pills or machines or whatever.
Yeah, what I found was that I've done a lot of spinal rehab with herniated discs, bulging discs, degenerative disc disease, and the classic physical therapy protocols that you see out there, they're good, but they typically only help people to a certain point. Mm-hmm. And that certain point, this is where I started looking at these natural movements we're still not getting these natural movements as if we were hunting and gathering. So what are these natural movements, and how can I get people to, and how does that entail spinal mechanics? And so I don't want to jump the gun and say that I've kind of discovered a whole new spinal mechanics, because I don't think I have. I just think I've reached a perspective on it maybe that isn't really common out there. And I found that our spine doesn't really work the way that we thought it did. And what I've seen in my practice is some pretty striking results of recovery that is much faster than what I would see in the past years ago, when I would use my Rolf work and the structural integration work, and also use classic PT fundamentals to recover people from spinal surgery. And I would have good results with that. But now I'm seeing something completely different, and I'm really excited about it. And I'm looking to introduce it into the world in the next year or so. Great.
Let me know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you,
Joan. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast here. And thank you very much for taking your time out of your, I'm sure, very busy day and sharing with us your knowledge that you have acquired. I'm sure we've only barely scratched the surface of what you know and what you've seen. And I just really enjoyed our time together today. So thank you very, very much.
It goes both ways. I enjoyed very much meeting you and our conversation, and just looking at things from a different perspective.
Absolutely. So is there any parting words that you'd like to give our audience? I personally recommend that I'm going to go and get some of your other books and read the other books that you have. And I recommend to our audience that they read your book. And but is there any parting words you'd like to leave them with? I'm going to put all your contact information in the show notes so that people can, go see your website and then go check out your books. And also I'm gonna put a link to that human centrifuge in there as well. So let's encourage our audience to build.
I'll send you the video and you can tell me.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. So, but do you have any parting words that you'd love to, or information or inspiration that you'd like to tell people?
Keep moving. Use your life, with purpose. You want some water, get up and get it. You stand up during commercials. Just that. would introduce a whole bunch of standing up movement throughout your day, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And making assumptions that you sit a lot in front of a TV set or some other goonish device. But think about what our parents and grandparents used to do. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they cleaned the house, they reached to get something, they bent over to pick up something. They used to actually scrub the floors. Now we have machines, so that's good. As long as we still move and walk and carry and have fun and play.
Play, absolutely. Play is important. Maybe the machines will help us play more.
Absolutely. If they could design the machines to help us play more, that would be best.
That would be. Joan, thank you again for your time, and I look forward to talking with you in the future. And please let me know of any new information that comes out, and I would love if you, when you finish your new book, let's announce it to everybody. I'd love to help you announce.
Absolutely. I don't think anyone feels stressed, but the other people than you who are stressed beyond 50 are concerned about something happening in the last 50 years of their life or the next 50 years of their life.
Yeah.
Come and get it.
All right.
Well, thank you.
All right, bye. Thank you for joining us. To learn more about Body Align Pro, visit bodyalignpro.com. Not tracking posture and range of motion yet? Level up your practice and download the Body Align Pro app for free on the Apple App Store and start tracking with photos and videos today. Do you like the show? Please give us a review, subscribe, and or share this so others may find us too. Once again, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links.